Hello, everyone. I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. The Manistee Paguk. The worn Nike duffel bag lay open on my bed, waiting to swallow my camping gear. My eyes drifted to the wall of photos from my high school experience. There was Charlie, my best friend since kindergarten, grinning like a maniac, his arms slung around my shoulder, joint poised in his lips. Another shot showed June and I, her smile radiant, a guitar clutched in my hands, my eyes locked on her as she sang along. My longtime crush, even when she was in a relationship. Then there was Jason in his basketball jersey, usually with some girl of the week clinging to him. We'd been through so much together, from awkward middle school romances to sneaking out to smoke behind the bleachers in high school. Now graduation caps thrown behind us, and this camping trip to Manistee National Forest felt like the last hurrah of us before we all scattered across the country. A buzz from my phone. Charlie. Yo, almost there home, skillet? I quickly shoved the last few items into my bag before zipping it up and heading downstairs. Bye, Grandma, Grandpa, I called out, walking over to give my grandpa a hug. Grandpa was already by Grandma's bedside, gently adjusting her blanket, untangling her dialysis machine. She'd been bedridden for months, and he was her constant, quiet guardian. Love you, Nana, I said, kissing her forehead. I'll be back after the weekend. Oh, I love you too, son, she replied, her voice a bit labored as she reached an arm over me to hug me. Don't have too much fun now. She and Grandpa had been my everything, raising me since my mom passed away. My dad was never really in the picture, gone long before I was born. Just as I reached the porch, a cacophony of honking erupted from the street. The beat-up Dodge van, Charlie's pride and joy, pulled up to the curb. Charlie's head popped out the window. Hope you're ready to trip absolute donkey dick this weekend, Charlie said, holding up a baggie of brownie. Ashley and June giggled from the back. I grabbed my bag and jogged out, a nervous excitement fluttering in my chest. This was it. The drive into Manistee National Forest was a blur of green. We passed one other campsite, a small tent tucked away with a few campers by the fire. They raised their beers as we passed by, before reaching our spot at the end of the drive-in. It was pretty secluded, surrounded by towering white pines. The air thick with the scent of the needles, damp with the earth. We quickly set up our camp, the 2 tents and fire pit, fueled by the energy from a promise of a wild night. And wild it was. This was our graduation celebration, after all. The music blared from the speaker, a mix of grunge and classic rock. We passed joints around, the sweet, earthy smoke mingling with the campfire smell. Charlie, true to his eccentric nature, pulled out the baggie of mushroom brownies. For a real trip, boys and girls. Keep arms and legs in and buckle your seatbelts. It's gonna be a bumpy ride, he announced, holding them out, his eyes gleaming. We all took a few, the laughter growing louder. The world began to warp. Colors intensified, sounds became echoes. I remember looking up at the canopy of trees, seeing the stars spin like glitter. Then a pair of yellow eyes in the darkness, a black owl perched on a branch watching us with an unnerving stillness. Later I saw him again, or thought I did. This time on the shoulder of a figure, tall and gaunt, moving silently through the trees, a native man. I remember trying to focus, to make sense of it, but the mushrooms had me in their grip. I just chalked it up to the trip, continued laughing with my friends, The next morning was a dull ache. Waking up to Charlie holding me in a little spoon, Jason's feet pressed against my cheek. My head throbbed. My mouth felt like sandpaper, but the first joint of the day was already lit courtesy of June, easing the edges of the hangover. I stumbled away from the campfire, needing to pee, headed deeper into the woods. That's when I saw him again. The native man, just as I remembered. Well, without the owl anyways, walking slowly, his back to me. My heart hammered. This wasn't a trip. I called out, but he didn't respond, just kept moving. I followed, a strange compulsion pulling me forward. He seemed to glide through the undergrowth, always just out of reach. I lost sight of him around a tree. I waited for a moment before turning to give up and go back. When there he was, suddenly right behind me, his eyes piercing, ancient. "You must leave," he said, his voice a low rumble, like stones shifting. "Leave this place. It's cursed land of the Paguk, and you are trespassing." "Were you staking us?" I blurted out before I could stop it. "You and your owl last night, watching me." His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his stoic face. "The owl? You saw the moot?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Then you know. The curse is upon you. Death is coming." "Thomas, what are you doing?" Jason's yell cut through the heavy air. I looked over my shoulder, startled. By the time I turned back, the native man was gone, vanished as if he'd never been there. The woods were silent once more, except for the distant chirping of birds and cicadas. Back at camp, the others were already cracking open beers, trying to shake off the lingering effects of the night. I tried to tell them about the native man, the owl, the warning, but they just laughed it off. "Still tripping, dude," Charlie said, passing me a beer. I sighed, cracking it open and sitting down on the folding chair. We settled into talking about the future. June, her eyes bright, spoke of moving to LA, of singing on big stages. Charlie, ever the instigator, grabbed my guitar. "Come on, Thomas. Play something for June?" I hesitated, but June's expectant smile was enough. I strummed a few chords, tuning the guitar I knew already was before playing the tune of Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. I loved it when June sang it, something her blush told me she already knew. She began to sing, her voice clear and beautiful, echoing through the trees. It was a perfect moment, fragile and fleeting. I stared at her for a moment when the song was over, watching her smile and laugh as she thanked her friends, applauding. Then Jason interrupted. "Hey, check this out." He pointed to the van. The front tire was completely flat, parked directly on a broken glass bottle. "No spare either," he grumbled, kicking the tire. We'd planned on staying another night anyway, so it wasn't a disaster, but it meant calling AAA tomorrow. Jason was already fuming about the cost. "It's okay, baby, we can ask the other campers. They had a truck, but the spare might fit," Ashley added, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, let's go interrupt their time to bring them into our problems," Jason interjected. June, ever observant, pointed to the oldest, gnarliest tree near our camp. "Whoa, look at this," she said, tracing something carved into its bark. "It says Paguk. It looks freaky." A chill ran down my spine. The name felt wrong, heavy. Just then, a blood-curdling scream tore through the forest, coming from up the drive from the other campsite. Charlie's face went pale. "I'll stay here with the woman," he stammered, clearly terrified. I chuckled, always so extra, I thought, before exchanging a look with Jason. "Let's go," he said, grabbing a flashlight. I nodded, a familiar unease settling over me. There was always a strange distance between us, and I wondered if he felt it too. "Hey, you good, Tommy?" he asked, confirming my suspicion. "Yeah, I'm good, just never alone with you, I guess," I admitted. "What, you scared of me or something?" he teased. No. You just seem to have it all figured out. I replied, choosing my words carefully. He scoffed. I'm far from that. I always thought you did. You aced school, play amazing guitar. June won't shut up about you. He grinned as my face flushed at the mention of her name. No, for real. Even when we were together, I could tell she liked you. Why haven't you asked her out yet? But she was your girlfriend before, I explained. I didn't want to seem like a jerk for asking her out after. You know, Thomas, he said, his voice low. You're a good dude. Always have been. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from the jock, and it made the horror we were walking towards even more unsettling. We stumbled upon the other campsite with a dreadful swiftness, the flickering firelight casting an eerie glow on a scene of carnage. 2 men and a woman lay sprawled amidst their overturned gear, their bodies grotesquely gutted. Near their tent, the 2 men lay lifeless, one with his throat slit ear to ear and his abdomen violently splayed open, exposing a tangle of viscera. Beside him, the other man was a mangled mess, his arms ripped clean from their sockets, leaving behind ragged, bloody stumps. The woman's body was equally disturbing. Her severed hand, frozen in a death grip, was on the handle of the truck, a testament to her effort to escape. Her torso lay on the ground, her jaw completely missing, a gaping, bloody void where her mouth should have been. Her eyes, or what remained of them, were gouged out, leaving only raw, empty sockets. The sheer, brutal force evident in the dismemberment and mutilation was horrifying, far beyond anything a human could inflict. My stomach lurched, threatening to betray me. Jesus fuck, we have to call somebody. We need to get them help, Jason whispered, his voice hoarse. Help? I questioned. I think they are way beyond helping, Jason. We pulled out our phones, but there was nothing. Dead zones. Jason remembered seeing a map at the entrance. We can take the golf cart back to the group, then head to the ranger station. I saw it on the map up the drive. I agreed, and we raced back to camp, the smell of blood still in my nostrils, wind hitting our faces through the open cage of the cart. We relayed the information, our voices hushed, urgent. Animal attack? Ashley whispered, her eyes wide. Lunatic, Charlie offered, shaking his head. We didn't want to find out. We piled into the golf cart, the engine sputtering to life, and sped towards the map at the drive-in. From there, we found the path to the ranger station. It was a small, dilapidated cabin. Pulling up into the lawn, we saw it looked completely empty. As we pulled up, the sky opened, a sudden violent storm lashing rain against the windows. We had no choice but to take shelter. A phone, a radio, anything to call for help, Jason urged, and we fanned out, desperate for a way to reach someone. Charlie snatched up the radio, his voice tight with panic. Yo, hello? Man, you gotta send someone. People are dying and shit, man. It's scary up in this bitch. Only static answered. You, hello, he screamed, his voice cracking. Guys, look. Ashley's voice was a strained whisper. She pointed out the window at the antenna tower. Its dish lay on the ground, the tower itself bent at an almost 90-degree angle. I don't think we're getting any messages out, June added, her voice flat with resignation. I pointed to the map on the wall. There's another DNR station 10 miles out. If we can make it there, there are bound to be people. They quickly grabbed the map, their gazes fixed on the front doors. As the doors swung open, a hulking, skeletal figure, its very essence vibrating with unnatural speed, stood waiting. It brandished a silver knife. Ashley screamed as the creature slashed its arm, its limbs crackling with an unsettling sound. She stumbled back, clutching her stomach as it carved a gash across her abdomen, falling to the ground. Charlie spun to run, but with impeccable speed, the creature snatched a bow from its back and drew the empty string. Charlie collapsed, clutching his leg, an arrow-sized hole appearing just above his knee. The creature drew the phantom arrow again, aiming it at me. I froze, paralyzed by terror, as Jason's voice boomed, "Hey, boner!" The creature turned just as Jason fired a flare directly into its shoulder. It recoiled, releasing the invisible bowstring, and something heavy smashed against the wall behind my head. A clock, now shattered. With a guttural snarl, the creature disappeared into the storm. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw it again. The owl perched on a branch, its eyes glowing. The moot. A surge of primal fear mixed with rage coursed through me. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy, dusty book, and hurled it at the bird. It shrieked, a sound like tearing fabric, and flew away into the storm. We needed help, desperately. We rummaged through the ranger station, our hands trembling. We found some tannerite for stumps, another flare for the flare gun, and a hunting rifle. I pocketed the tannerite, grabbed the flare gun from Jason as he took the rifle. "We're going for help," he said, his voice grim. "There's another ranger station 10 miles away. We'll take the cart." "Out to that thing?" June asked, her eyes wide with concern as she looked at me. "We'll be okay, June," Jason said, holding up the rifle. "Just look after Ashley for me, please." He glanced at Ashley, who was wincing on the couch, clutching her belly. "What about me?" Charlie asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, you too, Charlie," Jason added, a note of finality in his tone. We left Ashley and Charlie huddled together, June clinging to them, and piled into the golf cart. Jason slammed the accelerator and we lurched forward, plunging into the raging storm. The 2-track trail, already slick with mud, quickly became a marsh. The golf cart, built for leisurely strolls, not a desperate escape, groaned and shuddered before its wheels spun uselessly. "Damn it!" Jason grunted, trying to rock it free. We jumped out, pushing against the back, our feet sinking into the muck. It was useless. The cart was stuck fast. "Only 2 more miles!" Jason gasped, his face pale in the faint glow of the headlights, his breath plumbing in the frigid air. We started walking, the wind whipping at our clothes. Jason was limping heavily, his arm slung over my shoulder, leaning on me for support. The storm howled around us, a primal scream that seemed to swallow all other sounds. Trees swayed like drunken giants, their branches clawing at the sky. Every shifting shadow held a perceived threat, every creak and groan of the forest sounding like approaching footsteps. Just when I thought my legs would give out, a faint light appeared through the driving rain. The second ranger station, a small cabin nestled amongst the trees, stood as a beacon in the oppressive darkness. We stumbled towards it, half collapsing. Against the door. The door opened, revealing a burly man with a kind, weathered face. He took one look at our soaked, terrified expressions and the blood staining Jason's sleeve, and his demeanor shifted instantly. "What in God's name happened to you two?" the ranger exclaimed, his eyes scanning us with concern. We need help," I stammered, my voice hoarse. There's something out there." "Our friends are back at our campsite," Jason added, his voice strained. "One of them hurt badly." The ranger didn't hesitate. "Get in. I'll take you back. Just tell me where." He grabbed his keys from a hook, his gaze firm and reassuring. "We'll get 'em." "Thought my night was over," the ranger chuckled, his breath pluming in the cold air as he started the truck. It was far from over. The world exploded. A blinding flash of lightning ripped across the sky, followed by a deafening roar of thunder. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw the creature running alongside us in the tree line, a blur of skeletal fury. "Oh, shit!" the ranger yelled, his voice tight with alarm. The truck spun wildly on the slick trail, headlights sweeping across the thrashing trees before we slammed into something with a sickening crunch. My head snapped forward, slamming against the dashboard. Disoriented, the world tilted and spun. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog. Jason groaned from the passenger seat, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Broken. I lunged to help him, but the ranger was nowhere to be seen. Then came his screams. They ripped through the storm, echoing from all sides of the woods, agonizing and raw. A sickening thud followed, and then in the stark beam of the headlights, his head rolled into view. His eyes were gouged out, and a grotesque, stretched smile was carved into his cheeks. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Jason and hauling him to his feet. We stumbled, half ran, half crawled, Jason's dead weight, a terrible anchor, back towards the first ranger station. We burst through the front door of the ranger station, adrenaline coursing through us, only to be met with another wave of horror. Ashley lay slumped against the far wall, unconscious, a fresh, deep gash marring her arm. Her breath was shallow, almost imperceptible. Charlie was in even worse shape. He was clearly nodding out, his eyes glazed and unfocused, his breathing distressingly shallow. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. "June!" I screamed, my voice cracking, the name tearing from my throat. She was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My eyes darted frantically around the room, searching, praying, and then I saw it. A sickening smear of blood on the worn wooden floorboards leading directly to the back door. A clear drag trail followed, disappearing into the impenetrable darkness of the woods beyond. Without a second thought, driven by a primal urge to protect, I snatched up the rifle Jason had dropped earlier. Its cold metal felt heavy and strangely comforting in my trembling hands. "Stay here," I muttered, the words barely audible, though I knew it was a futile request. They were barely capable of staying conscious, let alone defending themselves. My gaze fixed on the grim trail, I pushed open the back door and plunged into the swirling, chaotic darkness of the storm. The crimson trail, stark against the damp earth, led me deeper into the churning chaos of the storm. The wind howled and rain lashed down, but I barely registered it. My focus was solely on the deepening smears of blood which, to my growing dread, veered sharply off the main trail, leading to a cluster of ancient, gnarled trees. There, half hidden by a cascade of thick, dripping vines, lay the gaping maw of a hidden cavern. Its entrance was a jagged, dark void exhaling the damp, earthy scent of ancient stone and something else. Something foul. I pulled the flashlight from my pocket, my fingers fumbling with the cold metal. Its narrow beam cut a weak swath through the oppressive, absolute darkness that swallowed the cavern's interior. Each droplet of water falling from the stalactites seemed to amplify the crushing silence. "June?" I whispered, the name catching in my throat, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to control it. The sound felt swallowed by the vast emptiness, a fragile plea against the encroaching terror. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet. I swept the beam across the cavern floor, past glistening, jagged rocks and stagnant puddles. And then, in a small alcove carved into the rock face, I saw her, June. She was huddled in a tight ball, shivering uncontrollably, her face pale and streaked with dirt and tears. But she was alive. "Thomas," she cried, her voice a raw, choked sob of pure relief. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the flashlight's glow, found mine, and for a fleeting moment, all the horror outside seemed to vanish. I rushed to her, pulling her to her feet. Her body felt frail and cold, trembling violently as I helped her steady herself. But just as her feet found solid ground, a profound shift in the air, a chilling drop in temperature made the hairs on my neck stand on end. From the deepest shadows of the cavern, a form began to coalesce, a presence so inherently wrong it stole the breath from my lungs. The beast, the Paguk. Its eyes, two pinpricks of malevolent glowing red, ignited in the darkness, fixed on us with an unwavering predatory intent. The air crackled with a palpable ancient evil. There was no escape. My hands, slick with sweat and shaking violently, brought the rifle up. The Paguk loomed, a horrifying silhouette against the faint light from the cavern entrance, its malevolent eyes burning. I squeezed the trigger. Once. The shot cracked. a deafening report in the enclosed space echoing off the damp stone walls. The creature barely flinched, the bullet, seemingly absorbed by its unnatural form. A fresh wave of despair washed over me, but I didn't stop. Twice. Another shot. Still it stood, a dark, terrifying monolith of pure malice. No visible wound, no sign of pain. It was like shooting at a shadow. A third, desperate squeeze of the trigger. Click. The sickening sound of a jammed rifle. My blood ran cold. The Paguk lunged, an impossible blur of speed. I barely had time to react, throwing myself backward, but its razor-sharp claws raked across my outstretched arm, then tore through my shirt, carving a searing path across my chest. Pain flared, hot and immediate, blossoming into 1,000 tiny agonies. We were locked in a desperate, brutal dance in the suffocating darkness. The creature was a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a phantom of destruction. Every swing, every parry, every desperate dodge was met with another agonizing tear. I was being shredded, cuts appearing everywhere, but I kept moving, a desperate, singular focus driving me. Keep it away from June. I snarled, pushed, shoved, anything to maintain a sliver of distance between the beast and her. Then a flash of movement. From the corner of my eye, I saw June. With surprising, almost impossible strength born of sheer terror and desperation, she had torn a jagged stalactite from the cave ceiling. It was heavy, razor-edged, and glistened menacingly in the dim light. With a raw, desperate cry that ripped from her throat, she plunged it with all her might into the beast's side. The Paguk shrieked. It wasn't a roar, but a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, an ear-splitting wail that vibrated through the very rock of the cavern. It recoiled violently, its glowing eyes wide with what seemed to be shock and pain. For the first time, it faltered. "Run!" I screamed, the single word ripped from my raw throat as I seized June's hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling, but she squeezed back, a silent testament to her terror and resolve. We stumbled, half crawling, half dragging ourselves towards the glimmer of the cavern entrance. The Paguk's guttural roars echoing behind us, a primal sound of fury and pain. Every ragged breath I took felt like broken glass in my lungs. Every muscle screamed in protest, but the image of that monstrous face propelled me forward. We burst out of the stifling, oppressive air of the cavern and into the still howling, storm-ravaged night. The rain lashed down, instantly chilling us to the bone, but the fresh air was a welcome shock after the stagnant dread of the cave. As my eyes frantically scanned our surroundings, a desperate thought, a fragile thread of hope sparked in my mind. The tannerite. My hand plunged into my pocket, fumbling blindly for the small, explosive canisters. My fingers, numb and clumsy, struggled with the fuse. I pulled it free, a small cylindrical shape, and with a surge of adrenaline-fueled urgency, I knelt and placed the tannerite just inside the cavern entrance, where the Paguk was likely to emerge. "Get back!" I bellowed to June, my voice barely audible above the storm's shriek. I yanked the flare gun from my belt, the smooth plastic cold against my palm. My aim was steady, a desperate focus narrowing my world to just the gun, the fuse, and the raging storm. I squeezed the trigger. The flare shot from the barrel, a brilliant red streak against the dark, churning air. It arced perfectly, a fiery arrow piercing the tempest, and plunged into the cavern directly onto the tannerite. Then came the explosion. A blinding flash of white light erupted from the cavern's mouth, momentarily searing itself into my retinas. It was followed by a thunderous roar, a concussive wave that slammed into us, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. The earth trembled, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through my bones. Tons of rock and earth rained down, a cascade of debris that hammered against the forest floor. Dust and pulverized stone billowed out, forming a choking cloud that momentarily obscured everything. When the echoes finally faded and the dust began to settle, The cavern entrance was gone. Sealed, buried, the monster hopefully along with it. We ran, not a slow jog but a desperate lung-searing sprint. Adrenaline, the last vestiges of it, pumped through our veins, a burning fuel that pushed us onward. Every shadow still seemed to hold the grotesque face of the paguk. Every snapped twig the sound of its pursuit. June stumbled beside me, but I held her hand tight, pulling her forward. Our ragged breaths plumed in the cold, rain-soaked air, mingling with the last lingering echoes of the explosion. Then, through the blurring rain and swaying trees, we saw them. A kaleidoscope of flashing blue and red lights pulsed through the dark, cutting through the storm like beacons. Police cars, dozens of them it seemed, clustered around the first ranger station. They were already there. A wave of profound, overwhelming relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. It was over. The next few hours were a disorienting blur. The sudden shift from primal terror to the organized chaos of emergency services was jarring. Uniformed officers, their faces grim and questioning, moved with purpose. Paramedics, their movements efficient and practiced, immediately took over, their voices calm amidst our trembling. They patched up my numerous cuts and gashes, cleaned June's scrapes, and gave us blankets that felt impossibly warm. Then came the questions. So many questions. They wanted us to recount the impossible, to put words to the unspeakable horror we had just endured. How do you describe a creature that defies all known biology? How do you explain a fight in a cave against a being of pure malice? We tried, our voices hoarse and our minds reeling, repeating the same unbelievable story over and over. They listened, their expressions unreadable, scribbling notes on pads. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, they let us leave. The storm had begun to subside, leaving behind a cold, clear night, but the quiet offered no comfort. The world felt irrevocably changed. On the long, quiet drive back, the world outside the car window felt strangely muted, almost dreamlike. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a crisp, star-dusted night, but the quiet offered little comfort. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of terrifying images and the dull ache of the cuts across my body. Then my phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, a harsh, insistent vibration that cut through the silence. I pulled it out, my thumb brushing against the screen. 24 missed calls, all from Grandpa. My heart sank, a leaden weight in my chest. A cold dread separate from the horrors of the night began to spread. He only called that many times for one reason. I called him back, bracing myself for the worst. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. His voice, when he finally spoke, was tired, worn down by grief, but strangely calm. "Tommy," he said, his voice raspy. "It's Grandma." "I know, Grandpa. I saw the calls." I managed to choke out my own voice tight. He paused, a long, heavy silence stretching between us. "She went peacefully, son. In her sleep." A strange, quiet grief settled over me, a heavy blanket that absorbed all other emotions. It was a profound, aching sadness, utterly unlike the visceral terror I had just faced. Coming after such a violent, chaotic night, this gentle, final passing felt surreal. A stark contrast to the brutal death we had witnessed. The world had torn itself apart, but in the quiet solitude of her bed, Grandma had simply slipped away. It was a raw, aching pain, made all the more poignant by the impossible events that had just unfolded. The aftermath of that night didn't just leave physical scars, it shattered the existing bonds between us. The group, once united by a shared purpose, fractured. Jason and Ashley couldn't withstand the immense pressure of the trauma they'd endured. Their relationship, once seemingly solid, crumbled under the weight of the unspeakable. The memories, the fear, the raw horror, it was simply too much. And they eventually went their separate ways. Charlie, still visibly shaken by the events, his eyes often distant and haunted, found solace in staying close to Jason. He ended up moving in with Jason, perhaps seeking a familiar anchor in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly unpredictable. They shared a different kind of burden, a quiet understanding of what they'd witnessed, but it was one that pushed them inward, away from the wider world. But June and we found something else in the aftermath. Something unexpected and profound, a shared understanding, a silent language forged in the crucible of terror. That night, fighting for our lives in the dark had stripped away all pretense, revealing raw courage and an undeniable connection. It was a bond forged in terror, yes, but it was also steeped in a deep, unspoken trust. We clung to that connection, nurturing it, letting it grow. And just as she'd always dreamed, we left the ghosts of the forest behind and moved to Los Angeles. The city's vibrant energy, its relentless pursuit of dreams, felt like a stark contrast to the shadowy woods we'd escaped. She pursued her passion, her voice a beacon of strength and vulnerability. She sang, her melodies carrying the echoes of what we'd lived through, transforming them into something beautiful. And I, with my guitar, played alongside her, our music becoming an extension of our shared experience. It was born from the darkness, undeniably shaped by the fear and loss we'd known. But with every note, it soared into the light, a testament to resilience, to connection, and to the healing power of shared purpose. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. Built to be loved. I was built to be loved and to give love in return. That was the sole intention with which my Creator made me. So when my new mother brought me home to meet my new sister, my heart leaped with excitement at the thought of finally fulfilling my life's purpose. "Jenny," said my new mother, "come here." I watched eagerly as my new sister bounded into the kitchen. This beautiful angel with gold hair and sparkling eyes was Jenny. I loved her the instant I saw her. It delighted me that she and I were almost the same size, though I was a little smaller. "What is it, Mom?" she asked. "I picked something up for you in town today," said our mother. She gleefully presented me to young Jenny. "What do you think?" Jenny's reaction was cooler than I'd hoped it would be. She stared at me for a moment and blinked. "It's a doll," she said. "Yes," our mother said. "Do you like it?" Jenny's lips curled into a smile, but the joy never quite reached her eyes. "Yes," she said. "She's beautiful. Thank you, Mommy." She took me in her arms, gave me a hug, and carried me off to the bedroom we would share. Maybe this will be fine after all, I thought to myself. Jenny placed me in a chair in the corner of our bedroom. I expected that I would sit here whenever she wasn't playing with me. And then, I thought, once bedtime came, we would surely snuggle together beneath the covers of the big bed on the other side of the room. This was not to be, however, as days went by, and Jenny never once took me from the chair. The most she would interact with me was to give me a suspicious glance from across the room. Sometimes this glance was accompanied by a shudder. That confirmed it. My new sister didn't like me. I was devastated. I decided I had to show her somehow that I was worthy of her affections. I needed her to know the love I was prepared to give her. So one night, when the lights went out and I was sure Jenny was asleep, I channeled every bit of focus and energy I had into my limbs of fabric and stuffing. After what felt like hours, to my excitement, they finally began to move. Yes, I had learned to control them. Clumsily, as this was all still new, I got down from the chair and made my way toward Jenny's bed. I had no idea before I started that moving would take so much energy. I managed to get only halfway across the room before I could go no further. It was there that I dropped, forced to wait until morning. At last, the first rays of sunshine leaked into the room from beneath the window shade. Mother came to the door as she always did. "Jenny, it's time to—" She stopped suddenly. "Jenny, what is your doll doing on the floor?" "I don't know," Jenny said groggily. "I didn't put it there." "Nonsense, Jenny," Mother said. "You need to take better care of your things, young lady." But I—" Before Jenny could protest any further, Mother cut her off. "Not another word, Jenny. Come downstairs and eat your breakfast." She closed the door, leaving us alone once more. Jenny got out of bed and slowly approached me where I lay. She moved with such trepidation as if I were going to explode at any moment. At long last, she picked me up. It was the first time she had done so since that first day of my adoption, and the sensation was sweet. It was short-lived, however, as a moment later she placed me firmly back in the chair from which I'd come. She looked me over, not with suspicion this time, but with something like worry. Perhaps it was fear. "Jenny, hurry up," Mother called from downstairs. Jenny snapped to attention and obeyed, hurrying quickly from the room. I now understood, of course, that I was simply too weak or too new to walking to make the journey all the way across the room. The only thing to be done, I decided, was to practice. Each night, when I was sure Jenny had gone to bed, I would come down from my place and venture across the room. For the first few nights, whenever I felt my energy and strength leaving me, I would turn and try to get back to the chair with whatever I had left. Often, at first, I would simply collapse on the floor in front of or beneath the chair. In the mornings, when Jenny would discover me, I would be met with the same looks of confusion and concern. They never stopped feeling like rejection, but the pain I felt only made me more determined to show Jenny how worthy I was of her love. Just as I had hoped, moving became easier and easier. Within 2 months, I could make it all the way to Jenny's bed. The first time she discovered me there on the floor beside her bed in the morning, she screamed, to my utter surprise. She didn't even pick me up, but instead ran from the room. Moments later, she returned with Mother. "There," Jenny said, pointing at me where I lay. "Jenny," said Mother, "don't be silly. Your doll just fell out of your bed while you were sleeping." "But I didn't sleep with it," Jenny said. "I swear." Mother smiled sweetly. "Jenny, it's okay to sleep with your doll if you want to. You don't need to make things up." "But I—" "Now that's enough," Mother said. "Pick up your doll and come downstairs for breakfast." "I'm not touching her," Jenny snapped. "Jennifer," Mother said firmly, "stop acting up this instant. Pick up your doll right now." Jenny looked defeated. She hesitated and then slowly approached me. Mother watched as she slowly picked me up and placed me on the chair. "Thank you," she said. "Now come on before your pancakes get cold." I was left alone once again, stinging from the obvious dislike Jenny felt for me. I couldn't give up, though. I had to show her how loving and warm I could be, and I was very nearly there. The next night, I could barely contain my excitement. I felt good, I felt ready. Deep down, I knew I could do this. As had become my habit, I hopped down from my chair and made my way across the room. Only when I reached Jenny's bed did I begin to tire. I reached up, grabbed hold of the edge of Jenny's mattress, and hoisted myself up to where she slept. At last, I was beside her, my sweet sister. This was where I had longed to be. I sat for a long time just watching Jenny sleep. She looked so peaceful, her little chest rising and falling. The slightest hint of a snore issued forth on every exhale. The love and emotion coursing through me almost made me shake. It's the one and only dream of every creature like me to be loved and cherished by a little girl like Jenny. It's what we were made to do. Without that, we are nothing. Now was my chance. I decided to show Jenny how loving and comforting I could be. I inched slowly over to her face, the only part of her that lay exposed in a sea of blankets and pillows. I wrapped myself around her head in the tightest embrace I could manage. It felt wonderful to do so. I wish I could have spoken in that moment because I would have shouted over and over again, "I love you, Jenny! I love you!" I felt her begin to stir beneath my grasp. Her movements became more and more erratic. A hand reached up from the blanket and tried to pull me away. The harder she pulled, the more steadfastly I held on. I had to show her that this was good. She needed to know that this was how things had to be. But still, she tried to free herself from my embrace. The grasping became clawing. She tried to sit up, but I wouldn't let her. Soon her actions began to slow. The efforts became less and less urgent until finally all the tension seemed to leave her. This was what I had been dreaming of. She was no longer frightened of me. Acceptance at last. Mother knocked on the door the next morning as she normally did, but Jenny did not stir. This was highly unusual, and I became worried when time passed and my sister still hadn't moved. Mother came in calling Jenny's name. Slowly, she approached the bed where we lay. I watched in confusion as Mother dropped to her knees. She let out a scream like no other I had ever heard. I knew something was wrong with Jenny. That was the last time I saw my beautiful sister. I miss her every single day, but it's not all bad. I live in Mother's room now. She talks to me fairly often. "You, my little darling," she says. "You were the last gift I ever gave her." She must have loved you dearly, but she was afraid to let me know. Big girls don't sleep with dolls, I suppose. She follows this with a small, half-hearted laugh and then begins crying once more, as has become her habit. Each night, however, she takes me to bed with her and holds me tight. I was built to be loved and to give love in return. That was the sole intention with which my Creator made me. I wish I could have had that with Jenny for more than one night before she went away. However, it's clear that Mother needs me now, and I her, and together we find love and comfort in each other. Story 2 ends here. Now, we drift into Story 3. Rap Rat. Ever heard of Nightmare? Like a lot of other games in the 90s, it came with a VHS which you timed with your play. The character on the video would give you instructions on what to do while you played the game in real time. Being a scaredy cat, I refused to play it when my mom bought it for us. My brother was disappointed about not being able to play Nightmare, but my mom had a solution. She brought out Rap Rat. It was a cheap, dingy little thing catered to kids my age. You went around the board, collected cheese, and the first player to reach the end would win. It seemed simple enough, and since it reminded us of Mousetrap, which we didn't have, there were no objections. We popped the movie into the VHS and set up the board. The first part of the video was just a simple explanation of the rules as well as instructions on how the game worked. Then, Rap Rat came onto the TV. He was not what any of us had been expecting. My smaller brother, who was only 3 at the time, immediately left the room crying. The rat did not even resemble a rat. The ears were far too big. It had a mouth lined with 2 teeth, and the inside of the mouth looked almost swollen. The most striking part about the thing, though, was the eyes. They were large, glassy, and fish-like. I asked, then bothered, then begged my mom to turn it off. Rap Rat suddenly shouted loudly, screaming and wailing, saying, "Wait your turn," in a demonic, low-pitched voice that was not at all like his normal, obnoxious, nasal voice. In the background, we could hear the narrator saying, "He's Rap Rat, and he's the boss," over and over again in an overly serious tone. The video was indescribable. Images crossed the screen in quick succession, overcut with Rap Rat's expressionless eyes. The images were some of the things I was afraid of at the time. A person looking over a balcony, a hornet slowly stinging someone's eye, an extreme close-up of a tarantula, a pit full of writhing cobras, and a bloodied syringe filled with green fluid. We immediately turned the video off and I ran out of the room screaming, slamming my door. It took my mom 20 minutes to convince me that the video was gone, that I would never, ever see it again. I had nightmares all week about Rap Rat. That wasn't the last time I saw Rap Rat. While my girlfriend and I were preparing to move in together, I was cleaning out the closet of my room and found Rap Rat again, with the same VHS and the same board game inside. It was almost perfectly intact, save for a thick layer of cobwebs and dust bunnies on top of it. This was strange. Didn't my mother get rid of it? And what was the game doing in my room? I let out a bit of a gasp when I found it, and my girlfriend came into the room asking what was the matter. Breathing harshly, I said, "Rap Rat." She laughed a bit, asking if it was a joke. I shook my head, explaining that it wasn't. She didn't believe me, nobody did. And I decided that the only way to prove it to her was to show her the video. I borrowed my neighbor's VHS and played the video for her. However, the images had changed. I saw a clown, its nose bursting and spraying blood onto the screen. I saw a woman alone in a dark room. I saw a man being forced to pick up white-hot metal and hold it in his outstretched hand, turning his hand to a leathery mess. The scratching I heard as a child continued, picking up louder and louder. Then Rap Rat showed up and began twisting and convulsing, its arms thrusting this way and that. The costume wasn't a costume anymore. The felt was real fur. Its face wasn't plastic, but instead a bristle of thorns with teeth. The eyes turned inwards and suddenly popped out again. Rap Rat's huge fish eyes were inside out, staring right at me, watching my every move, my every expression. It grinned widely and gestured at my girlfriend and I with a single, outstretched, inhuman hand. I could hear the faintest scratching at my front door. The TV went blank and showed static. The scratching got louder. It wasn't scratching anymore, but thumping. The thumping of tiny feet on wood. My girlfriend embraced me in fear and my senses kicked in. Before anything else could happen, I stopped the video, ejected it, and unplugged the VHS. The scratching stopped. When I looked out the living room window, nothing was there. The police showed up soon after, warning us that a neighbor had seen a figure outside of our door and had called in concern. My girlfriend and I simply couldn't explain what had happened and had to tell the police officer that it was us. I was furious that a children's game was terrifying me. I went to pick up the tape, but the VHS burned my hand. It felt like I had touched a Bunsen burner on the highest setting. We had to get the oven mitts from the kitchen in order to take it out, and even then it was scorching hot. I brought it outside, tossed it down on the sidewalk, and crushed it with my winter boots. My girlfriend and I had nightmares every night. We would both wake up in the middle of the night and describe eerily similar images that we saw in our sleep. The scratching would always be there at night when lights were off and the room was pitch black, save for the moonlight coming in through the window. Now, though, the scratching would happen every time I went near the front door and every time we said Rap Rat's name. It sounded as if something very small was dragging something across the ground outside of the door, pacing, waiting. I would simply wait with the covers pulled up to my neck until I succumbed to exhaustion. At this point, I was determined to sue the company for damages. The first thing I did was call my mother and ask where she got Rap Rat. She had no idea. I found a merchant who sold versions of Rap Rat and asked how I could get in touch with the company. He sent me this email. I don't know about the game, but I know it was created by the same people who created Nightmare. The company is called A Couple of Cowboys. Try them. I did a bit more research and discovered that the company became defunct in 1994. Only 2 years after the company created Rap Rat. I discovered why they did soon after. How Rap Rat came to be. In 1992, the year of the game's development, A couple of cowboys had commissioned a manufacturing company in Haiti to create the doll portrayed in the game. The company who created the puppet ran a sweatshop, where they forced women and children to produce the various components of the puppet, including the felt and plastic of the doll. One day, a young Haitian girl got her arm caught in the industrial sewing machine. The spring loader, unable to handle the weight on the machine, came loose and struck the child's neck, killing her instantly. A few days after the funeral, the mother of the child came to the factory demanding to see the owner, who denied that he had anything to do with it. In a fit of rage, the mother said that the blood from the innocent would seep into every crevice of the doll, every component with which it was created, and all who touched it would die. She claimed to have summoned a fear demon and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Apparat will curse you." The owner simply laughed and told his corporate bosses about Apparat. They spread the joke from person to person, and the game was renamed Rap Rat, a loose anagram of Apparat. Each recitation of the name Apparat brought with it a greater and greater curse. Only 2 years after Rap Rat was created, the company was shut down and the owners hired by Mattel. There were stories of the workers begging for days off, skipping work for weeks and weeks, finding the puppet in strange places. Sooner were the stories of suicides. Grim, violent suicides in which the workers would stab their hands and burn themselves to death, writing "I am fear" on the nearest surface in blood. Nobody knows where the Rap Rat doll went after the original creators disappeared. Some say that the last things the victims saw before going insane were large, sunken, fish-like eyes. Words of warning: 1. Never, ever say Apparat out loud. Saying a demon's name out loud is an invitation to them, a calling. If you have already done this, it cannot be undone. 2. Do not try to speak to or contact Apparat. 3. Avoid being awake between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., when Rap Rat is the most likely to try to scare you. The audio. The VHS is back. I thought I stomped on it, smashed it to Kingdom Come, but it's back. I found it in my sock drawer yesterday. This time I was ready. A whole bunch of people have been contacting me, trying to get the tape or some sort of video from the board game. My answer to you is that it's just too dangerous. If I did that, it could very well drive you insane, scare you to death. The video and the game and Rap Rat itself has some sort of strange power. Rap Rat follows me everywhere I go. I see little shadows in the corner or hear sounds coming down the hallway when I'm the only one home. If Rap Rat is there, it will let you know, but it will never let you see it. Until it's too late, of course. A lot of people have been watching the normal video from the normal board game. That's the thing, Rap Rat can be normal. It will trick you into thinking it's just a puppet and then stalk you day and night. Story 3 ends here. Now, listen closely to Story 4. Tuin, No End House. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. "David, man, we need to talk." That was when he told me about the No End House. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliché. Reach the final room of the building and you win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently Peter had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict, so I figured the drugs got the best of him and he wigged out at a paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason a chill crawls up your spine? I walked toward the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let a relieved sigh leave me as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way, 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheet ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spider webs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guessed they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob and my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows, plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were others. I had barely walked in the door and I was already terrified. It was at that moment that I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe, but I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it. Or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark and never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I would never have been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. Wasn't even sure there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly but could barely even see my nose. I knew it was there, though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed for a second and I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing, and I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards away from the noise and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict. I have had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were only when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered the no-end house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me, it simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various brush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but this was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there, however high it was. I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was still inside was that the floor matched the other rooms, the standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin at different places. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, more of a whimper, to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't even seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was that was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it. The low hum from before. It was coming from the next room, and it was deeper. I could almost feel it inside my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert. The feeling of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I would make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6 and my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door I had shut was gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3, the same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door and the one I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at that moment I fell into what I now know was insanity. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. At first I scratched softly. The wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob was. I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees, the only sound in the room the incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there. The door was there. I knew it was just there. I knew if I could just get past this wall. "Are you all right?" I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me and I saw what it was that spoke to me. To this day, I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl. She was wearing a soft white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back and white skin and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying, and it was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room, but it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form, and when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak. I could barely even see. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and I had never been more scared than when I was trapped in the 4th room, but that was before room 6. I just stood there staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped here with it. And then it spoke again. "David, you should have listened." When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl, but the other form spoke through my mind in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet couldn't take my eyes off what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I had passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring down at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of the battery-powered rats from the 2nd room. The house was toying with me, but for some reason seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed, and I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell, and I wasn't ready to take up a residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, the voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up to all four, and turned to scan the wall behind me. Then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood with a small dent chipped away in the center of it. Right in front of my eyes, I saw the large 7 I had mindlessly etched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond that wall where room 5 was moments ago. I don't know how I had done it. Maybe it was just my state of mind at the time. But I had created the door. I knew I had. In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most: an exit to the next room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both hands on the large 7 in front of me. I pushed. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving. It told me that this was the end, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it. I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered. Just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time to well. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly. What I saw was a door. It wasn't the one I had scratched in, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung. I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I just went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving No End House had faded and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and immediately went up to my room. There on my bed was my cat Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock, as he had never acted like that. I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I descended the stairs and turned into the family room. What I saw would be forever burned into my mind, however. My parents were lying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads were placed on their chests facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling as though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in the family room. I didn't know what had happened. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was a mess. Then I saw it. A door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be, but they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up. The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. Then the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to walk slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk. And the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed as though they were going to crumble, but still the faces smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me. I was now between the two bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands clawed their way across the carpet towards me, all while the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want the voices to match those of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and the hands were inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged toward the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me. Room 8. I was done. After what I had just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of No End House. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in Room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in Room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of Rooms 3 and 6, but sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me, it was David Williams. I walked closer. I had to get a better look, even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me, and I noticed tears in his eyes. "Please, please, don't do it. Please don't hurt me." "What?" I asked. "Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you." "Yes, you are." He was sobbing now. "You're going to hurt me, and I don't want you to." He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. "Listen, who are you?" I was now only a few feet from my doppelganger. It was the weirdest experience yet, standing there talking to myself. I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. "Why are you? You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to hurt me. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, all right? Let's try and figure this." And then I saw it. The David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt embroidered with the number 9. "You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. Don't, please. You're going to hurt me." My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall, but by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents. But 9, this number was on a person, a living person. Worse still, it was on a person that looked exactly like me. "David?" I had to ask. "Yes. You're going to hurt me, you're going to hurt me." He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to the voice. But that 9. I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door, and similarly to Room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason, I assumed that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To David from Management." The feeling in my stomach as I read that tag was something sinister. I wanted to throw up, and the last thing I wanted to do was remove that knife from under that chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions. Who put this here, and how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor, I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts for some reason turned to Peter and whether or not he got this far. If he did, if he met a Peter Terry sobbing in this very chair, rocking back and forth, I shook those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair and immediately the other David went quiet. "David," he said in my voice, "what do you think you're going to do?" I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." David was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly, he got up from the chair and stood facing me. It was uncanny. His height and even the way he stood matched mine. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter. I don't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it. "Now," his voice was slightly deeper than my own. "I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder, and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I had experienced up to that point. Room 4 was dark, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark. Then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, and suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it, and the mind has trouble differentiating between what is real and what isn't. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days, the final room, and that's exactly what it was, the end. No End House had an end, and I had reached it. At that moment, I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all senses. I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth and found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. Then it happened. A light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt ground come up from below me and I was standing. After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked toward that light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started, the lobby of No End House. It was exactly how I left it, still empty, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything that had happened that night, I was still wary of where I was. After a few moments of normalcy, I looked around the place trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious, yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again handwritten. David Williams. Congratulations. You have made it to the end of No End House. Please accept this prize as a token of great achievement. Yours forever, management. With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked out to my car and laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled into my driveway. I laughed as I opened my front door to my house and laughed as I saw the small 10 etched into the wood. Story 4 ends here, and now we enter the fog of Story 5. Charles Bonnet Syndrome. I suffer with a condition called Charles Bonnet syndrome, or visual release hallucinations if you want to get more technical. It's a condition that's far more common than you might realize. It's estimated that as many as half of people with gradual loss of vision will experience one or more bouts over their lifetime. Yet I'm willing to bet that most of you have never heard of it. The reason for that is because most sufferers are scared to tell anybody what we experience. I know I was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Andrew and I'm 26. 2 years ago I woke up with awful blurred vision, every single edge and detail clouded as if somebody had smeared Vaseline on a camera lens. It never got better. I was scared then and got over to Dr. Harper's surgery as fast as I could, suddenly needing to take a cab rather than climb in the car I'd driven without incident ever since I'd bought it 3 years prior. The doctor did some tests, asked me some questions. Have you been much thirstier lately? How often do you urinate? How would you describe your tiredness levels? And then gave me the diagnosis that changed my life forever. Diabetes, type 1. He explained that I would need to take insulin shots with every meal, that eating the wrong foods without monitoring my blood sugar could see me drop into a coma, or worse. Then he got to my eyes. Andrew, your diabetes has resulted in maculopathy. Do you know what that is? I shook my head dumbly, already reeling with the shock of my diagnosis, and Dr. Harper went on. It's when the diabetes affects the blood vessels at the back of your eye, blocking them and causing them to leak into the macula, the central part of your retina that helps you to perceive color and fine detail. When these blood vessels leak into the macula, it can cause significant damage. With a lump in my throat, I asked, "Okay, so how do we make this better?" I couldn't see Harper's face properly when he spoke, but his tone of voice was enough to tell me what I'd been dreading. "I'm sorry, Andrew," he replied gravely. "Perhaps if we'd caught this a little sooner, we might have had some treatment options available to us, but I'm afraid the damage has been pretty extensive. We can take steps to arrest the development of the condition, but I'm afraid it's irreversible." I felt as if my world had come crashing down around me. I was just 24, still at my physical peak. I was active, playing basketball and cycling a couple of times a week. And now my health, my body, and my sight had been taken from me. The first 6 months were tough. I broke up with my girlfriend, a sweet girl called Holly, who tried to make it work but couldn't because I was so damn angry all the time. I lost my job because if there's one thing an architect needs, it's his eyes. I even fell out with a lot of my friends, making excuses to not meet with them until they stopped asking. In truth, it was jealousy on my part, envy that they got to keep on living while everything I'd ever hoped for had been snatched away. I became a recluse, never leaving my apartment, barely bothering to wash, shave, or get dressed each day. I was so sure that my life was over, I stopped even trying to live it. I was an asshole. It took me a long time to realize this, but in the end it was the nurse assigned to visit me at home, a tall, no-nonsense, experienced woman called Lois, who brought this to my attention. "You're an asshole," she said. "What?" I gasped, shocked at her language. "So you've got diabetes. Do you know how many people do?" she asked. Then, before waiting for my answer, she continued. "Do you think they all hide in their apartments, refusing to get on with their lives? Losing your vision is a terrible thing, and you do have my sympathy, but Andrew, it's no excuse to give up." "But you don't," I argued, trying to defend myself, but she hadn't finished. "Understand," she growled. "One of the bravest men I know was paralyzed from the neck down when he was just a child, and he hasn't given up. You can do so much more with your life. And you have people that want to help you do that, but you can't even be bothered to shave that ugly fucking beard off. Stop being a crybaby and make a fucking difference." Of course, it didn't happen overnight, and I argued with her. I was furious at her blunt insensitivity and told her to leave. I said I'd tell her superiors, but she laughed and told me I wouldn't. "You won't because you're a smart guy and you've got too much pride for that," she said. "I'll see you next week." That night I shaved. I opened my curtains and actually looked around. Things were blurry, but when I really looked, I could see the things scattered around my home, the mess I'd let it become. When Lois came back the following week, the place was tidy. I was clean-shaven, dressed. I'd even attempted to comb my hair. She didn't say anything about it, didn't mention the argument of the week before, but she took me out for coffee down the street. She guided me along the sidewalk to the coffee shop, talking to me, reassuring me. It was daunting, even though it was less than a block away, but I felt so proud when I got there. We talked, me and Lois. I think I even laughed. Afterwards, she walked me home. Then, when she helped me back inside, she said, "It's nice to meet you at last, Andrew." That day was the beginning of my new life. I moved to a new apartment, a ground floor place, and joined a group of other young people with visual impairments. I made friends. I got out every day, even if it was just a short walk, but I made a point of seeing what I could of the world. I bought what I could, but the Sawyers, the old couple that ran the local store, would bring my groceries by once a week. Clark's a gruff old coot, so he refuses to coddle me, and he's told me that he respects me for being like I am, for maintaining my independence, for not giving up. From a guy like him, that's one of the sweetest things I've ever heard. Things were going so well. And then, 1 year ago, it started. I walked into my living room, a mug of coffee in my hand, and I saw a Victorian funeral carriage stood right there on my rug, complete with 2 huge, proud horses in full livery adorned with long black plumes in their bridles. They stood perfectly still while the driver, a small bearded man in period costume and a top hat, fidgeted with the reins and peered at me expectantly. Bizarrely, they were far clearer than the usual blurry shapes that I could see. I damn near pissed my pants. I dropped the cup, spilling scalding hot coffee over my bare feet, jumping backwards with a cry of pain and alarm. When I returned my attention to the horses and carriage back in the room, they were gone. In that moment, I wondered if I was going mad. Apparently, most of us do, which is understandable. How would you feel if you'd seen that exact same sight in your home? Unless you're Jack the Ripper, I imagine many of you do not have a coach and horses just laying around. I certainly didn't. Eventually, after much quiet swearing to myself and more than a little self-delusion, I managed to convince myself that I had not seen what I thought I had, that it was merely a very vivid daydream. This seemed to work, and I got on with living, even if I entered that same room a little more cautiously in the days that followed. Finally, I forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I saw a giant, floating, swirling orange ball in my bathroom. I damn near pissed myself again. I stood staring at it, this bizarre, rotating, levitating globe that was a little larger than a beach ball hanging in midair over my tub, open-mouthed for a full 10 seconds before finally screwing my eyelids tightly closed and whispering to myself, "That isn't there. That isn't there." After 5 seconds, I opened my eyes again. It wasn't there. Have you ever had cause to doubt your own sanity? To wonder whether what you perceive is truly there, or if your mind has betrayed you? Honestly, compared to the loss of my vision, the prospect at losing my wits was so much more terrifying. I'd fought against adversity and took pride in the fact that I am not just a survivor, I'm somebody who is living his own life. How could I do that if I was insane? I barely slept that night, and I remained jumpy for days afterwards. Any sign of movement or any unfamiliar shape would set my pulse racing, would cause me to doubt whether it was truly there. It was the toughest time I'd ever been through, worse even than that time after I was diagnosed with diabetes. At least when Dr. Harper had told me about the diabetes, I had a definitive prognosis. I was given facts by a medical professional. My affliction was physical. It had a name, and most important, it had a treatment plan. This was something else. My own mind had turned against me. My senses and perception of reality had become twisted and unreliable. It's only when you're in that position that you realize just how terrifying it is. Your senses and the way in which your brain interprets them are your only true defenses against danger. You perceive danger and you avoid it, preventing your body from becoming harmed. But what happens when you can't trust your perception to alert you to dangers that are truly there? Lois picked up the problem first, noticing my skittish manner. She asked what was wrong, if I needed to talk about anything, but I told her no, I was fine, but I hadn't been sleeping well. That last part was true. I hadn't been able to sleep a wink. Just the very thought of being institutionalized, spending the rest of my days a sedated blue pajama-clad zombie in a white room with only the echoing cries of my fellow inmates for company, terrified me beyond measure. But what was the alternative? Live life as a risk to myself and others? Ultimately, I chose to ignore it. I reasoned that if I was able to function around other people without them realizing what was going on, that was good enough. A full month passed before the next incident, and I really did think that maybe I'd put this whole mess behind me. With every passing day, my confidence had grown, so that Wednesday morning I'd stepped out onto the sunny street feeling pretty carefree. Each Wednesday I'd treat myself to a latte down at Joe's, the same coffee shop that I'd visited with Lois. It was a custom that gave me a great deal of pleasure, one that had seen me forge friendships with other regulars as well as the staff, including Joe himself. As I made my way down the street, white stick in hand, I glanced about me, taking in the colors and shapes of the world around me. I enjoyed the feel of the sun on my face and the sounds of the birds singing. It was a good day. Then I saw them. A party of pilgrims, 6 of them all dressed in settler-era attire, sitting cross-legged on the asphalt. They didn't look at me. Instead, they were engaged in a heated yet strangely silent conversation. I froze, staring at them. Still they argued, gesticulating furiously at one another. However, I couldn't hear their angry voices, despite the fact that, judging by their ill temperament, they must be screaming at one another. Paralyzed by shock, the white stick fell from my numb fingers, clattering onto the sidewalk. I turned to leave, desperate to flee from the haunting sight of the colonists in the road. But I was so panicked, in such a hurry, that I stepped on my cane. It rolled underfoot, and before I knew it, I pitched over, tumbling to hard ground below. I didn't quite break my fall in time, banging my cheek hard on the floor and skinning my palms. I heard a cry from a passerby, a friendly, concerned woman who rushed to my side. She knelt beside me, helping me up, applying a Kleenex to my throbbing cheek, which she informed me was now bleeding. I tried to tell her that I was okay, there was nothing to worry about, but this good Samaritan insisted on driving me to Dr. Harper's office to get my injuries looked at. Now I think back to it, I'm pretty sure that she knew my obvious distress was nothing to do with the fall. At the time I was embarrassed and angry, but now I realize I owe her a debt of gratitude. Without her intervention, I don't know how much longer this would have gone on before I cracked up and ended up in an asylum after breaking down through sheer stress. "Andrew, why don't you tell me what happened?" Dr. Harper asked, gently dabbing at my cheek with disinfectant. I explained that I'd just lost my balance, that no harm was done, but I think he saw through my feeble protestations to my underlying agitation. He didn't press, he didn't force the matter, he simply asked what might have caused my clumsiness. Then he asked how I'd been as of late. When I'd finished mumbling my way through the most non-committal answer I could muster, he placed a gentle, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Andrew, he repeated gently, why don't you tell me what happened? I burst into tears. I told him how scared I was, how I'd fought so hard for my independence and now I knew it would be taken from me. He listened patiently, then asked me to tell him why I ever thought that. I paused then, took a deep breath and thought about it. This was the point of no return, but really what other option did I have? So with tears running down my cheeks, I told Dr. Harper everything. I told him about the horse and carriage, the orange globe and the pilgrims. I told him how I'd been living each day in fear, how I was terrified that I was losing my mind. Dr. Harper thought for a while, then he said, Andrew, I don't think you are losing your mind. The sense of relief at that moment was so powerful it overwhelmed me, rendering me speechless. You say that even though you've seen these things, you've never heard any noise from them. Have you detected any odors or experienced any other physical sensations, such as touching them? I shook my head no, and he patted my shoulder once again. Andrew, have you heard of Charles Bonnet syndrome? He asked. Charles Bone? Who? I asked, confused by this sudden, unexpected turn of conversation. Okay, let me explain, Dr. Harper said kindly. Charles Bonnet was a Swiss naturalist who was born in the 1700s. He discovered a curious condition in his elderly grandfather who was nearly completely blind due to cataracts. The old man regularly experienced visual hallucinations, including random patterns and even people and places. Sound familiar? Yes, I replied, still confused. Am I suffering dementia? No, Andrew, not at all, Dr. Harper reassured me. Do you know how perception works? In layman's terms, your eyes take in light via the iris and pupil, which is then processed via the retina and translated into electrical signals which are decoded by the brain, which simply organizes these signals into a recognizable image. With me so far? I nodded, finally starting to understand. When the retina becomes damaged, such as those that have undergone macular degeneration, those signals become warped and jumbled. Dr. Harper went on. The brain still receives them, so it does its job translating these distorted signals into an image. It kind of fills in the gaps for you. Sometimes it fills these gaps with colors, patterns, creatures, and places that aren't present. And this is called Charles Bonnet syndrome. I nearly wept with relief. So I'm not mad? I cried. Not at all, the doctor replied. This is an entirely physical condition. Your mind is in full working order. If you were suffering any form of mental illness, your delusions wouldn't be limited to just the one sense. You'd hear these interlopers, smell them, even feel them. This is a condition solely related to your eyes, not your brain. As I left Dr. Harper's office, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Sure, my vision was still an issue, but now I knew it was only a problem with my eyes, not my mind. I knew I could handle the situation. I was ready to face the world again. Since then, I've seen plenty of weird visions. I saw a huge waterfall in the park, complete with a hazy mist and butterflies flitting about it. I saw a Native American warrior, complete with a huge feather headdress, sitting at a stool at the counter in the coffee shop. I saw an intricate and quite impossible structure of scaffolding crisscrossing the entire front of my apartment block. Hell, on the 4th of July last year, I even saw a great swooping green dragon in the sky, twisting and cavorting through the air overhead. All looked utterly and completely real, yet now I knew they were simply tricks of the eye. They were no longer disturbing. In fact, I actually came to quite enjoy them, even looking at them as unique and entertaining little shows or works of art that existed purely for my pleasure and nobody else's. I came to welcome them. Then a month ago I saw her. It was nighttime. It's always nighttime when I see her, and I was just getting ready for bed. I walked into the kitchen to get myself a glass of water and actually cried out in alarm when I spotted the figure in the corner. She was tall, by far the tallest woman I'd ever seen, and even though she stood hunched, she still had at least 6 inches on me. I was used to seeing characters in dated and bizarre dress, but this was different somehow. It didn't seem like an outfit from any one time, instead a bizarre mishmash of items. She wore a tuxedo jacket, figure-hugging and black tailored to the female body shape, over a dirty old ruffled dress shirt. To complete the ensemble, she wore a bright red bow tie. On her hands, which she held out to either side as if shrugging, or maybe feeling for rain, she wore dirty white gloves. Her fingers were disproportionately long, almost spidery, and occasionally they twitched, as if she longed to grip and squeeze something in them. On her lower half, she wore shorts the same crimson as her bow tie over opaque black nylons. Her legs were long, lithe, attractive, if the truth be told, the legs of a dancer. She also wore red heels, the same hue as her shorts and bow tie, but they sparkled and shimmered, bringing to mind Judy Garland's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. As strange as this ensemble was, I couldn't tear my eyes from her face. Most of it was obscured by a jaunty bowler hat, tipped and tilted to hide her eyes and nose, but beneath the brim of her hat I could see the deathly pale skin of her face and a grin that sent shivers down my spine. It was wide, too wide, with entirely too many teeth. A smile is meant to be an expression of warmth. It's meant to feel welcoming and benevolent. But the look on this woman's face oozed malice. It felt much like the sort of glee I'd expect from a snake as it corners a rat. However, the thing that startled me most was that she had a third arm sprouting from her back, curled up and over her head like a scorpion's tail. It was longer than any arm should be, and the hand only had 3 fingers like a claw. It was pointed straight at me, and as I swore in dismay and stumbled sideways, it seemed to track my movement. I stood staring at the creepy figure for a few seconds, trying to get my head around the situation. She just stood there in the corner, grinning back. Finally, I realized that this was just another of my hallucinations and breathed an audible sigh of relief. One of the tricks I've picked up over the months of suffering with Charles Bonnet syndrome is to break the line of vision toward whichever stimulus is causing my brain to interpret the images into the hallucination. Think of it like restarting a faulty computer, how refreshing the system debugs it. To this end, I close my eyes and count to 5. Then when I reopen them, the hallucination is gone. So as I stared at the horrifying, malformed figure in my kitchen, I knew that to make the image go away, I simply had to close my eyes. I'll be honest here. When I counted to 5, I hesitated a little before opening my eyes. If I'd opened my eyes and she'd still been stood there smiling that wicked smile at me, I think I might have had a heart attack. She wasn't. And I breathed another long sigh of relief, fetched my glass of water, and went back to bed. The tall woman haunted my thoughts in the days after I saw her. She was different to the other visions I'd had. Somehow she felt more real. It was this agitation that my buddy Jason picked up on when we met for lunch the following Friday. Jason was one of those same friends I'd tried to drive away shortly after I lost my vision. Yet he'd refused to give up on me, continuing to get in touch week after week. Good friends are hard to come by, but great friends, the ones who will be by your side for life, are even rarer. Jason, God bless his kind heart, is one of the latter. "You've got to tell me what's going on, dude," he said as we sat down over pizza. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to brush it off. "You're so distracted, it's like you're looking for something in here all the time. You've eaten, like, 1 slice in pizza in the time it's taken me to eat 4. So I repeat, you've got to tell me what's going on," Jason said, waving a slice of pizza around for emphasis. "It's nothing," I replied, feeling a little stupid. "I just had a hallucination a couple of nights ago that really got to me." I thought you were cool with those now, he asked, putting the pizza slice down. Yeah, I am. I mean, I was, but this was different, I replied, resigned to talking about it. She scared me. She? Jason asked, his interest clearly piqued. Tell me about it. So I did. I described the tall woman and how she'd appeared to me. I explained that unlike any of my other hallucinations, she felt more real, and that she was the first to feature such a weird and unsettling mutation. Sure, I'd seen smaller versions of people in the past, a phenomenon referred to as Lilliputian by medical professionals, but the extra appendage and impossibly distorted face were something I had yet to encounter thus far. I think it was that, combined with the unnerving expectant stance, that had disturbed me the most. So, Jason said after I'd finished, you say she had great legs? Shut up, you asshole, I laughed, throwing my napkin at him. No, seriously, I get it, man, Jason replied, passing the napkin back to me. If I walked into a room and a giant mutant was waiting for me, it'd scare the shit out of me too. But you know what caused you to see this. It's like the coachman and that waterfall you saw. It's a condition that you know you have, and it's one that you know how to deal with, okay? I know, I replied. Thanks, man, you're right. I did feel better too, so I smiled at him, took a big bite of my pizza and changed the subject, asking him about his psycho ex, a conversation he was all too happy to dive into. The next time I saw the tall woman, just under a week later, I was brushing my teeth. I was stood at the wash basin brushing away when I spotted a figure in the mirror. She was out in the dark hallway, peeking around the door behind me. That same sinister grin I'd seen before stretched her narrow face into a distorted grimace, the dirty bowler hat pushed down over her eyes once again. Each of those 3 long, spidery hands gripped the doorframe. As crazy as this sounds, it felt like she was trying to avoid being spotted. I cried out, spitting toothpaste foam all over the mirror, my toothbrush clattering into the basin. I spun around, my heart thumping in my chest, my breathing ragged in my throat. She wasn't there, of course she wasn't. The doorway was empty. I tiptoed forward hesitantly, trying to look around the doorframe into the hallway without actually sticking my neck out into its shadowy confines. The seconds ticked by as I drew closer and closer. I couldn't see anything, so, finally, with a whisper of self-affirmation, I stepped out of the bathroom. The hallway was empty, as was the rest of my apartment. I was shaken again. This was the first time I'd seen a hallucination in a reflection, and I wasn't even sure that I'd actually seen it. Now, as I sit here writing this, knowing what would follow, I think I thought like that to try to protect myself, to shield myself from the truth. I was an idiot. A full fortnight passed without incident. Sure, I saw a flash of color one day, a dancing yellow lightning bolt that zigzagged back and forth on the street outside my apartment. But that was exactly the sort of thing I'd come to expect from my condition. It was exciting, otherworldly, but it wasn't scary, not like she was. In retrospect, that fortnight was blissful. It was a reminder of what life could be like, the existence that I'd carved out for myself since my diagnosis. Life was good. The night that changed the way I viewed the tall woman last night, I'd been out and had a couple of drinks. I'd met the other guys with visual impairment for dinner, and we'd ended up at a bar afterwards. I wasn't hammered, but we got through plenty of beer between us, and by the time I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt decidedly lightheaded. It took me a while to make it home, laughing and talking to a couple of the other guys from our group as we strolled along. It had been a great evening. It's probably the last truly good one I'll ever have. I bid the other guys good night and, fumbling with my key, let myself in. With swaying steps, I strolled into my hallway, slamming the door a little too loudly behind me. I took off my jacket, hung it on the hook by the door, then hit the light switch. She was waiting at the end of the hallway, all 3 hands held aloft into claws, reaching for me. that same maddening, malevolent grin on her pale face. I swore again, louder than ever, actually jumping back a step, recoiling from the impossibly tall and terrifying figure lying in wait in my own home. The tall woman didn't move, she just stood there, staring and smiling at me. I stared back, but I sure as hell didn't smile. "Jesus Christ," I muttered under my breath. You know how you can feel a little paranoid after a few beers? That feeling of non-specific post-alcohol dread? Imagine that combined with a giant grinning mutant woman suddenly appearing in your home. Suffice it to say, it was very, very, very uncool. "I don't need this," I sighed and closed my eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I opened my eyes, her face was just a foot from my own, grinning wider than ever. She dashed the length of the hallway and was now stood so close that her long, grasping arms were either side of me, her fingers twitching and clawing at the air around my face. I could see her chest heaving as if she were actually laughing silently at my attempts to dismiss her, as if the thought that I could ever be free of her was amusing. I screamed a full-bodied shriek of terror and actually dropped to my knees, covering my head as if to fend off an expected blow. It never came. Finally, I lowered my hands, gasping for breath, shaking. The hallway was empty, the tall woman nowhere to be seen. I stayed there on my knees for a moment, gasping for breath. Then I was on my feet and I turned and ran. Out of the apartment, out of the building and into the street. I stood there, shivering, terrified beyond reason, without a clue as to what I'd do next. Finally, I pulled my phone from my pocket and I made a phone call. "Hey Andy, what's up?" Jason asked. "Jason, I need you to come here," I said, sobbing. Jason didn't ask why, didn't complain. Instead, he simply replied, "I'm on my way." Less than 20 minutes later, his car pulled up outside and he dashed over to the steps outside my building where I was sitting, shivering. He threw his jacket around my shoulders and asked what happened, his voice filled with concern. "She's in there," I stammered. "The tall woman, she's back." Okay, he said, gently helping me to my feet. "Come on, man, let's go in there and check it out." I wish I could say that I was brave when we went inside, but I'd be lying. I cowered behind Jason, one hand on his shoulder as we made our way through my home. Of course, we didn't find a thing. We're talking a giant mutant woman in a poky little one-bed apartment. Where the hell was she going to hide? Finally, after we'd checked every single room twice, I had to admit that she was gone. "I'm so sorry, man," I apologized, feeling genuinely stupid. "I got scared and... I'm sorry, man." "Hey, forget about it, buddy," Jason said. "So I'm here now. Where do you keep your booze?" Half a bottle of bourbon later, we were both feeling pretty talkative. "She's, just kinda different, I tried to explain. I get it, he said. "It's like you saw something bad and you feel bad and... That's bad." He didn't get it. "No, she's different, I explained. "I've never had a repeat hallucination before, and they've never been scary, She's not like the others." "Dude," Jason said, taking another sip of bourbon, "you've got like Charlie Boney syndrome and that makes you see shit, so..." He waved his hands in the air like a magician who'd just performed a trick. I know, I replied. "No, listen, Andy," he said. It makes you see shit. It's just your eyes, yeah? You didn't hear anything. You didn't feel anything. This is how that stuff goes. It's your eyes, and I know it's scary, man, but you've been through, like, hell and high water in your life so far. You're tough. One of the toughest, bravest guys I know. And you can handle some creepy hallucination, bitch. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "She is a very creepy hallucination bitch, though, dude." He laughed too, and we both took a drink. "That could help," he said finally, his voice thoughtful. "What, drinking?" I asked. "No, well, yes, it does," he giggled. I mean, like demystifying her. You should give her a name, something stupid, so she's not scary. I've got say that as much as I like creepy hallucination bitch, that's a bit of a mouthful, I laughed. Yeah, I get that, he replied. Suddenly, something he'd said came back to me. How about Helen? I suggested. Helen Highwater? Awesome, he said, then raised his glass. Here's to Helen, buddy. To Helen, I smiled and drained my glass. Jason spent the night on my sofa mainly because he'd had too much to drink to even think about getting behind the wheel of a vehicle. But honestly, I think the reason he drank so much was so he'd have an excuse to stay and keep an eye on me. I'm glad he did. Knowing that he was there made me feel safer and I was able to get some sleep. It gave me a sense of security to know that if the strange vision I'd just christened Helen was to appear again, I'd be able to call on him for support. This morning we both needed support. It feels like a mule kicked me in the head, he groaned when I made my way into the living room. Yep, I replied, my own head thumping. Joe's? Joe's, he replied firmly and staggered to his feet. As we drank strong black coffee and ate muffins, we didn't talk much. Finally, Jason broke the silence. So, you feel cool now? He asked, his mouth still full of blueberry muffin. I nodded. Yeah, I think so. Not still freaked out about you-know-who? He asked. Helen? I replied with a smile. No, I really don't think I am. I reckon I can handle some creepy hallucination bitch. Good, he laughed, giving me a hearty pat on the back. That's cool, man. I bet you can. Now, as I sit here cowering in my bathroom, too scared to go out into my apartment, I know we were both wrong. About everything. Remember how earlier I told you that the thought of being institutionalized, that the very idea of losing my grasp on reality was the most terrifying thing I could imagine? Now I'd welcome that because the alternative is far, far worse. After breakfast, I said goodbye to Jason and he climbed into his car and drove away. The day passed without incident, and when Lois stopped by this afternoon, she even commented on how upbeat I seemed. You got a lady in your life? She asked casually. I laughed at that, wondered what she'd think if she knew the truth. Yeah, I chuckled, something like that. Good for you, she sniffed. You make sure you treat her right. That tickled me even more and I had to bite my lip. Sure, I replied, I'll do my best. Tonight, still a little wiped from the exertions of the previous evening, I decided to turn in early. I brushed my teeth, washed my hands and face, and got changed. Finally, I fetched a glass of water and walked into my bedroom. I climbed into bed and instantly felt so relaxed. Within mere seconds, I was ready for sleep. That sudden, overwhelming drowsiness that comes when you've spent a whole day keeping sleep at bay. I decided that resistance was futile and sat up to switch off the light. I nearly didn't see her, but as I reached for the switch, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned to the foot of my bed. The tall woman was crouching there, her grinning face staring at me from just beyond my feet. So many teeth. Her long, slender fingers spread out over my blankets, twitching slightly as she gripped the end of the bed. Slowly, excruciatingly so, her third misshapen arm came into view over her shoulder, joining her other hands on my bedding. I froze, utterly petrified. I was at a crossroads here, arriving at a pivotal moment that had been coming for some time. She watched me, grinning as if she was waiting to see what I'd do. Cruel amusement flickering across her pale face. But this time I'd had enough. You don't scare me anymore, I said, my voice filled with defiance and anger. I'm not letting you do this to me. I reached across to the light switch. Good night, Helen, I said triumphantly, then flicked it, plunging the room into darkness. I laid there, a sense of tremendous pride surging through me, and I grinned to myself in my warm, comfortable bed, overjoyed at the emotional victory of overcoming my own fear. And then it happened. The thing that led me here, something that turned my blood to ice water, my bowels to jelly. "Good night, Andrew," her rasping voice hissed from the darkness.